Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We continue our work at Ukraine Crisis Media Center, and the next event for today is weekly updates from the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission about security situation in the east of Ukraine. Now I give the floor to Mr. Alexander Hug, Principal Deputy Chief Monitor of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine.
Good afternoon. Last week, our monitors observed 2,057 ceasefire violations, a 5% decrease on the week before. Where there are ceasefire violations, there are weapons. We did in fact note 76 weapons that should have been withdrawn in accordance with the Minsk agreements. Here, for instance, you can see what one of our unmanned aerial vehicles spotted in government-controlled Mykolivka on 2nd of October. It is most likely a 120mm mortar alongside an infantry fighting vehicle. The mortar should have been at least 15 kilometers from the contact line in a specially designated holding area. It is not. Or here, in so-called DPR-controlled Verkhno-Shirokivske, another unmanned aerial vehicle spotted a main battle tank. This tank should be in a holding area at least 15 kilometers from the contact line. It is not. And similar to the previous week, we have been registering a large number of weapons just beyond withdrawal lines. Near so-called DPR-controlled Torres, for example, an SMM unmanned aerial vehicle spotted a large concentration of hardware. Here, in this image, you can see 15 main battle tanks, 3 self-propelled howitzers, 1 self-propelled mortar vehicle, and 3 armored personnel carriers. Most of the ceasefire violations we registered last week were in the usual hotspots: the Avdiivka-Yassinovate Donetsk airport area, areas to the east and northeast of Mariupol, and around Svetlodarsk. There was, however, also quite a lot of ceasefire violations recorded in an area about 40 kilometers northwest of Luhansk city, in particular between government-controlled Krymske and so-called LPR-controlled Sokilniki. There, in just one day, 28th September, about 90% of all SMM recorded explosions caused by artillery systems last week occurred. Like in Svetlodarsk the previous week, where we have seen sudden escalation, the events in the Krymske-Sokilniki area demonstrate high volatility. The sites know, you know, we know. This will remain the case so long as the sites refuse to withdraw weapons or disengage forces and hardware. I need hardly remind you that the sides, just as they have with the ceasefire, have already agreed to withdraw weapons and disengage. These are in fact measures that are designed to underpin the agreed ceasefire. And yet, we have no withdrawal, no disengagement, and of course, no ceasefire. Dear friends, there is a price to be paid for the failure of the sides to adhere to the agreements they signed. That price is mostly paid by the civilian population of eastern Ukraine. The decrease in the number of ceasefire violations we have been recording since late August has had a marked effect on the rate of recorded civilian casualties. In September, we registered a 62% drop in the number of ceasefire violations compared to August from 22,658 down to 8,683. Alongside it, there was a 59% decrease in the number of civilian casualties recorded by the SMM in September compared to August. It demonstrates an obvious and known correlation between reduced number of ceasefire violations and reduced numbers of fatalities and injuries among civilians. It also demonstrates a moral and political responsibility on the part of those in positions of power to end this conflict. Yet, and yes, there is a correlation between reduced violence and fewer civilian casualties. But equally true, there is a correlation between the continued, albeit lower, level of violence and the continued suffering of the civilian population. In September, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine confirmed 15 civilian casualties, 2 killed and 13 injured. The link between deaths and injuries and ceasefire violations committed by the sides is indisputable. Those who carry out and those who condone or order those ceasefire violations carry a heavy responsibility. Civilians on both sides of the contact line expect those in positions of power, those who give orders and those who have the responsibility to protect them, to finally do what is necessary. End the fighting, withdraw heavy weapons, and disengage. Dear friends, working among the civilian population in eastern Ukraine are over 500 unarmed civilian monitors from the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. Their security is our highest priority. They operate in armored vehicles, wear personal protection equipment, and there is a host of security measures in place to minimize risks and threats against them. But as we saw in April in Priship, when an SMM patrol member was killed and 2 monitors were injured in an explosion probably caused by an anti-tank mine, sometimes no amount of risk mitigation measures can stop people intent on doing harm and inflicting human suffering. As we saw last week, with 2,057 ceasefire violations, there are many such people out there on both sides of the contact line. On Tuesday this week, we saw how those committing ceasefire violations to do so in total disregard of the safety of these unarmed civilian monitors. Close to so-called DPR-controlled Pikusi, small arms fire was noted just 500 meters from a SMM patrol. And just yesterday, our monitors were in the vicinity of so-called LPR-controlled Krasny Liman, where they heard 8 explosions, rocket-propelled grenades impacting approximately 500 meters from their position. At around the same time yesterday morning, at the entry-exit checkpoint near government-controlled Novotroitske, I saw for myself the disregard for the lives of civilians. Along with hundreds of civilians, I and other SMM monitors were caught in the middle of fighting while queuing to cross the contact line. We identified at least 2 outgoing 82mm mortars. In all 3 incidents, SMM monitors were in no immediate danger, but the episodes demonstrate how armed men, knowing in advance that unarmed civilian monitors would be in those areas, nonetheless insisted firing weapons that can have lethal consequences. these armed men and those in suit commanding them or tolerating their acts seem to forget one thing. OSCE SMM monitors are not party to this conflict. They are not belligerents. They come from 44 of the 57 participating states, from all walks of life, but with just one objective: peace. These monitors are not asking for medals or even recognition, but they deserve respect and, more so, the protection of those in positions of power. Firing weapons in their vicinity, endangering or undermining their security in any way, and sometimes even directly targeting them, is against internationally accepted norms. All civilians, including OSCE SMM monitors, must be protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hook. Now it's time for questions. Dear colleagues, if you have questions, you're welcome to ask them.
Crimean agency, news agency, in one of your reports, the SMM reported that local population in Pikuza, formerly Kominternova, sent a letter with a request to withdraw weapons from the village and to withdraw armed men in this militant-controlled village. Yesterday, DPR members claimed that there was no such request in the letter. Could you please shed the light on this issue?
Thank you. As I've said many times here, if we do report a mistake, we will correct it. And so we have done in this case. That letter indeed did not contain a request as reported. However, civilians did request the same. We made this clear and have reissued that report. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, please.
Yesterday, SMM took part in the handover of the remnants and debris of Boeing. Could you please comment in more details on this handover?
Thank you. I can confirm that the SMM has facilitated, that's important, facilitated the handover of possible human remains and debris from the MH17 flight. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, do you have more questions? It seems that this is all for today, so thank you, Mr. Hook, and we are waiting for the next report.